everyone, and welcome to the horrific blood-drenched crime scene that is our Halloween special from TotalCults.com. I'm James Trick.
I'm Dr. Gogol.
And I'm overly cheerful today.
Because it's Halloween?
Because it's Halloween, absolutely. Nothing
Or around that
there's
time.
Something about my ghoulies has got me in a jovial Halloweeny mood, and my voice has gone up an octave as well. I've never seen you so animated.
No,
absolutely.
So yeah, it's a Halloween special.
It is.
I'm going to possibly add something to the sting at the start to make it slightly scarier. And
it's going to be something shit, isn't it? It's going to be like a woo.
Yeah, or the sound of a bat flapping. But I could also, if we think it's a good idea, put one of those. Remember the BBC sound effects tapes?
Yes.
And there was a scary Halloween one, which was just noises. I just had that running in the background the whole way through this podcast.
I remember Sounds of Death and Horror on. No, it was on vinyl, and they had it in the library, and it was a BBC sound effects album, and it was just called BBC Presents Sounds of Death and Horror, and it had this sort of friendly-looking cartoon on the front of someone on the rack, and it had someone on the rack was one of the sound effects. It was like, but bearing in mind that so few people were involved in amateur filmmaking, or even radio plays or whatever. And they sold these a lot. These were a mainstream release. I can remember them advertising them, and I can remember them stocking them in the library. What was this actually that someone would pour themselves a glass of wine and go, I'm going to listen to the sounds of some people being tortured now, brought to me by the BBC.
See, I had a kind of combat one, but...
Sounds of war.
Sounds of people being punched.
Widows' tears splashing against the ground, all that sort of thing.
But what I found unusual as well, I mean, they weren't particularly good.
No.
I mean, bear in mind, the rack...
very long on them.
The rack was someone going,
And someone else twisting a wallet. It was like...
Yeah, surely if you're making a film where you've got a rack, you can record your own sound effect of someone going, probably the person on the rack. So the voices match.
So you're saying that the hard bit would actually be getting the rack rather than getting the creaky noise?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's probably quite accurate.
So what does Halloween mean to you?
Well, the trick-or-treating thing, which is for our American listeners, we didn't have this. We didn't used to have this. 20 years ago, we didn't used to have Halloween. We used to have Halloween. We didn't used to have trick-or-treat. We do now have trick-or-treat, so thanks a fucking heap for that. My first experience of trick-or-treating, I mean, I was aware of it as a concept because I'd seen it in E.T. I think that's where all of our generation, more or less, first got exposed to trick-or-treating. They saw it in E.T. and went, well, that's weird. Is that something that's been made up for the purposes of the movie, or is that actually something that happens? So I was aware of it in a sort of vaguely cultural way from that, and then didn't think about trick-or-treating for years and years and years. And then in about 1994, I think this was, I got a knock on my door a couple of nights before Halloween, I think, and I was living in a shared student house at the time, and I opened the door, and there was this kid, and he wasn't really dressed up particularly or whatever, and he just said, trick or treat. And I looked at him, I said, we don't have that here.
Yeah.
What do you mean trick or treat? And he's like, trick or treat. And I thought, okay, I've got to kind of give him something. And I went back into the house, and amazingly, I had an apple. And I don't know why I had an apple. As I said, it was a student house. It seems horribly unlikely. At least I didn't give him a fucking can of lager. But, somehow found this apple. And I went back out and I said, I'm really sorry, I've got this apple, but... I wasn't expecting trick-or-treaters because this is England, you know, and we don't have it here. And I gave him the apple, and he went away. And then the next morning I got up, and he'd sprayed "fuck off" on the side of my house, which I thought was a slightly excessive introduction to trick-or-treating. And I never, ever quite managed to scrub that "fuck off" out. So even when I moved out, there was a little faded one just on the wall. So that was how I met trick-or-treating. And that's probably clouded my attitudes towards it if it had been something that I'd enjoyed doing as a kid or something like that. But all I associate it with is adolescents knocking on my door and then vandalising my home.
See, for a while, when it started to become a bit more kind of commonplace for people to be doing that, I just assumed it was going to be an excuse for people to egg people's houses. There wasn't no even knocking on doors.
It was just going to be an egg free-for-all.
But generally speaking, I've not had a single trick-or-treat related issue.
Really? When you say issue,
in terms of it's gone badly,
right? Okay, so it's all smooth sailing.
Halloween for me was always I always look forward to it because of the programming that would be on TV. Now we're talking about 4 channels,
right? Yep.
So obviously not a lot of time was given up for horror films on a daily basis. So Halloween, it was going to be the horror film night, and this was at the time when I was just getting into film in a serious way, to some degree, and. I remember there was a kind of evening program called Dr. Terror's something. And it was going in proper face prosthetics in the kind of smoking jacket. It was very introducing it, kind of like the Crypt Keeper. And it was a proper evening. There was about 3 or 4 horror films on of varying types, and I remember sitting watching it and loving it. It was like a whole evening spent. It was like comic relief,
right? But with blood,
better. So yeah, really, really enjoyed that. Incidentally, I kind of regret that in a way because it was on at the same time as Ghost Watch was on the other side, which I never saw when it was on TV, which obviously I understand was something, and having seen clips, was something special.
I actually, did you realise that got re-released last week on DVD?
No, I didn't.
And I picked it up. It's £3 in the supermarket over the road from where we're recording this very podcast.
Where are we recording this?
Indeed.
And when?
Indeed. And mind you, if they say this one's going to go up Halloween week, isn't it, really, even if we have to knock some of the others out of sequence. But yeah, Ghostwatch for me was that's the pivotal kind of Halloween TV experience. I was actually again, this takes me back to my student days, but I was living in a hotel with about 30 other students because they'd run out of halls of residence, and they basically said, let's just hire out a hotel for a year. That would be a great idea. And so we were all sitting in this hotel lounge watching what was ostensibly a Crime Watch style program with Michael Parkinson and Craig Charles and Sarah Green. And a couple of the students were genuinely freaking out, more or less from about 20 minutes in. Which gave it was one of the most incredible TV watching experiences. For anybody who hasn't seen Ghost Watch, by the way, first of all, I thoroughly recommend it, and I think you can go and, as I said, the DVD's just been re-released, so go and pick it up. It has dated quite a bit now. I've revisited it fairly recently. However, if you look at it in the context of the time when it was shown, which I think was 93, 94, somewhere around there, it must have been. It was a remarkable piece of TV. The audience was a lot less savvy about the idea of faux reality, I suppose you'd call it. And a lot of people got suckered into thinking this was a genuine Crime Watch style investigation of the paranormal, and thus when it sort of spirals down into supernatural chaos, they were genuinely freaked out by it, and the show wasn't repeated for over a decade. There was a general feeling that the BBC had broken their bond of trust with the viewer by crediting them with some fucking intelligence, which obviously terribly misguided thing to do. But yeah, it's a really great piece of TV, and watching it in that environment, it was genuinely, I'd clocked fairly early on, probably when the written by credit came up, that what I was watching was fake. But watching it, but I didn't say that to the rest of the room I was sitting with. And certainly watching it in that environment with people genuinely freaking out, people genuinely very, very unhappy about what was going on screen. It was a really remarkable evening's TV, and one of my favourite Halloween memories ever. Now,
bear in mind, I would, the evening's programme I chose to watch at the time was just me alone in my room. So...
Hang on, you watched a programme of you alone in your room?
No. I was watching...
I can't imagine there was much demand for that.
It was a mirror. No, so I can't...
Did your parents tell you it was a telly? You go, oh, it's this bastard on again. All he does is cry and masturbate.
Just repeats. So I don't know whether... I wouldn't have had the same experience anyway had I watched it, because obviously not with people.
You might have had a different, startling experience.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think I'd have... had it freaked me out too much, I would have had the option to turn it over. So it would have either been just no fun at all, watched it, or it would have
too much fun,
and I'd have ended it. So sounds like you saw it in the optimum.
Yes, it was perfect. No one was going to turn it off or turn it over because there were 20 people invested in it by that point. It was one of the most perfect viewing experiences of my life.
Now, the reason I brought up TV scheduling is because after that, what I thought was a glorious night, because what I chose to watch was equally great.
You had great fun with it. Can you remember what the movies were?
I can't remember what they were off the top of my head. I just know there was a variety. I think there was something hammery in there. There was something recent.
I think they showed. Actually, I seem to remember, because it went on obviously longer than Ghostwatch and Ghostwatch. I think they showed Creep Show possibly.
Possibly, yeah. That sounds right.
Yeah, because I think we flicked over after Ghostwatch had finished and caught at least one of them.
Yeah. Subsequent Halloweens, the TV program got worse and worse, to the point where, and again, this is before I think before Freeview was there, and Sky or cable was still something that you had to pay quite a lot of money that not everyone had. That people just stopped bothering programming horror films, or even anything Halloween related on Halloween night. There's been nothing on, and that used to really anger me, because I mean it was still still a sort of holiday that we don't celebrate. In a kind of party atmosphere as much. It's not something that everyone goes, what we do for Halloween. No, it's just there. And because trick-or-treating really hadn't come into it, it was like the only thing you do on Halloween is sit and watch horror films. And then no one was bothering to do it. And it was kind of like it was ignored. And I think that's still kind of the case now, because obviously with so many channels, it's difficult to not have a horror film on at some point. So it's relevant. But Halloween is much bigger now. You've got the trick-or-treating, but also you walk into any major supermarket and it's just loaded with animatronic witches and things chasing you around the aisles and stuff like that.
Things chasing you around the aisle? Is this something you suffer in supermarkets a lot?
There is another supermarket. If we mention their names, do you think this is one of these things where...
They'll send us free stuff, or they'll sue us?
Yes.
It could be one or the other, couldn't it?
Someone will turn up.
What does it rhyme with? Does it rhyme with Jainsbury's?
No.
Does it rhyme with... It rhymes with Basda. Excellent. Okay, so the supermarket that rhymes with Basda. What chased you around the aisles of Basda?
Well, previous 2 years, they've had an animatronic butler who stands and looks inert, and when you walk past him, kind of his eyes swirl around and he barks.
Did you check that everyone else could see this?
I didn't. I just assumed.
Right, no. You've got in trouble with this before, haven't you? This whole assuming everybody else can see the animatronic butler, assuming everybody else can see the murdered girl lying on the floor. Yeah.
But at the moment, I've not witnessed it myself, so someone's told me about this.
Right.
But
is this a reliable person that's told you this?
I think so.
Right,
well, it's one of my family, so it depends if it's hereditary or not.
Yeah.
But it's like a broom that when you walk past it moves round. It's like it's got like a little electric car.
It's got a little electric car in it, right?
From the 40s.
Yeah.
It's like a remote control.
It's a broom containing a little electric car.
So it looks like it's mopping the floor of its own accord.
Right.
Which isn't the most terrifying Halloween thing,
no.
but it's it's interesting at least. Someone's put some effort in.
Yeah.
So it's a much bigger thing now and a much more interesting holiday. So beyond that, Halloween either represented in film or its impact on film.
Well, I mean, the Halloween movies, of course, we need to touch on and rub for a while.
Yes.
I think I've previously mentioned on one of these podcasts that I don't have much love for the Rob Zombie remake of Halloween, so we're going to brush that under the carpet and stamp on it like an unwanted hamster.
With an animatronic broom?
With an animatronic broom, absolutely. So we're going to ignore that one for a bit. But the originals, obviously, the Halloween is the classic, and it's not just the classic horror movie; it's the classic Halloween horror movie as well, isn't it? If you're going to watch a horror film on Halloween, Halloween's the one to do.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, that's kind of what it says.
Yeah.
But also Halloween 3, I have a sort of interesting...
Is that the mask one?
That's the one with the masks,
Is that Season of the Witch?
Yes, it is.
It doesn't have a witch in it, does it?
It doesn't have a witch in it, no.
Was it you that lent me that one?
No, I don't think so, no.
Must have been... Yeah.
Have you seen it?
I've seen it recently.
Right.
Yeah, fairly recently. Someone lent it to me. Which, it's bizarre, isn't it?
Yes, it's very odd.
It has no relation whatsoever.
Except that someone's watching the original on telly at one point, which is possibly the most tenuous sequel connection I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because on that basis, you can make a lot of films. On that basis, The Burbs is a sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.